A peaceful afternoon erupts in chaos when young siblings come home to the unthinkable.
We opened up the door, and that's when I noticed the pool of blood.
We've got a young mother who's been executed and a baby gone.
While a desperate search for a newborn baby ensues, red flags begin to surface.
He had brought his coworker over to meet the baby. My mom wasn't very happy.
He said, I really didn't want to tell you because I thought you would think that this was involved.
And police find the truth is stranger than fiction.
She was a clown that could perform at birthday parties.
It looked as if she might have been shopping for a baby.
She came in with the baby, and the hair stood up on the back of my neck.
It was time to either confess that she wasn't telling the truth or get a baby. She chose the latter.
Lehigh Acres, just outside of Fort Myers, Florida, is a well-kept haven with a small-town vibe.
Lehigh Acres is the eastern portion of the county. At the time, in the late 80s, early 90s, it wasn't heavily populated.
Growing up in Lehigh, we were pretty secluded. We spent a lot of time outside. It was a good life.
That childhood innocence comes to a tragic end on March 29, 1990, when 6-year-old twins Jacob and Joshua Parker return home from school.
I remember me and my brother getting off the school bus. Something at school that day happened. We wanted to hurry up and get home and tell Mom about it.
When we got home, opened up the door, and just, hi, Mom, we're home.
I happened to see her slumped over the side of the chair.
I thought she was asleep at first. And that's when I noticed the pool of blood in the floor. Then I noticed the gunshot wound to her head. We're both just kind of standing there, a couple 6-year-olds. We don't fully understand what's going on. And things just started clicking.
Scared and confused, the brothers look around for their newborn sister, Julie.
We had a 10-day-old sister. You know, she should have been crying. She should have been there. We walked through the house and we couldn't find her.
At a loss, the twins wait outside for their 14-year-old sister, Heather, to return home.
We didn't know what to do. We went back outside, waited for Heather to get off the bus.
I got off my school bus and my brothers were standing there waiting for me.
She was like, why are you guys out here? And so we go and we think Mom's dead. And she freaks out.
When I opened my front door, I could see my mom in the recliner. I was only 14 years old, so when I came in the house and saw my mom and I saw the blood, I really didn't know what had happened. I didn't know if she was shot or stabbed or attacked. I could just tell that my mom was gone and that my sister was missing. I ran to every room in the house and looked for her everywhere, and I couldn't find her. I picked up the phone to call 911. And then I took my brothers and started walking to our babysitter's house because it was within walking distance to us.
The babysitter quickly tries to contact the children's father, Gary Parker, at work. When the first responders arrive, they immediately determine there is nothing they can do, and detectives are called to the Parker home.
Word came in from patrol that they had a dead body in Lehigh Acres. Detectives were dispatched. Les Partington was one of them. I was one of them.
We found Sharon in a recliner. We were told the baby was missing. Without disturbing the whole scene, we certainly checked the house to make sure that the child wasn't there. Where is the child? Something was terribly wrong.
Who could fathom stealing a baby? It was a nightmare.
As an APB goes out for the missing newborn, investigators take a closer look at Sharon's body for clues.
She was leaned over to the left, and there was also blood dripping off of her head area down onto the carpet.
You could see that there was a wound in the back of the head. It appears to be a gunshot wound. We had a kidnapping, and we had a murder.
In this case, it's all hands on deck.
When it started, everybody's a suspect. There was a hurried rush to get people searching for Sharon Parker's child immediately. We went to the family. We went to neighbors. We went everywhere trying to figure out who was responsible for this.
Born and raised in Florida, Sharon Parker always thrived on strong family ties.
My mom had 2 sisters and a brother in the 60s and 70s. My mom was always very in fashion. She loved music, so she went to concerts and things with her friends.
In 1976, at the age of 19, Sharon's life took an unexpected turn when she discovered she was pregnant with a baby girl she later named Heather.
My mom and dad got married right out of high school. We lived in Alabama, where I was born, and we had a little house. They were very young, but she was a great mom. They were only married for the 3 years, and then they got a divorce, and she and I moved to Florida. My mother was a billing coordinator at Charter Glade Hospital, but really her job was to be a mom. That's what she loved doing.
The young mother didn't stay single for long. In 1983, Sharon's mother introduced her to an eligible bachelor, a contractor named Gary Parker.
He was a hard-working man. Dad worked for Lee Builders, and he was a supervisor. He was a carpenter, house builder.
They started dating and were married soon after, when I was in 1st grade. They would go out every Friday night. If they were in an argument or something, she would get flowers. I loved Gary. My mom loved him. He loved her.
A year after the wedding, the budding Parker family tree blossomed with twin sons, Joshua and Jacob.
Me and Jacob always had the mentality of me and him against the world. Heather was our second mom. We always called her Sissy. We always loved our Sissy.
In the late 80s, the family of 5 settled into the peaceful enclave of Lehigh, Florida, and embraced the small-town vibes.
We did a lot of things together as a family outside. We did camping out in the backyard in tents. We had a pool for the summertime.
I remember those days. We'd just all be out there, smiles and laughs, fire, hot dogs, marshmallows.
My mother and I loved music, and we used to sing on Saturday mornings when we were cleaning the house and to our hairbrushes.
In 1990, the young parents announced exciting news. Sharon was expecting another daughter.
When Mom told us that she was pregnant again with Julie, I was a teenager. Gary was very excited to have another baby, and Josh and Jake couldn't wait.
On March 19th, baby Julie was born, a healthy 7 pounds with a full head of dark hair.
I was super excited. Mother and I were looking forward to having another girl, and we did.
Only 10 days later, the family home is the scene of chaos and confusion. After finding their mother dead and their baby sister missing, Heather, Joshua, and Jacob wait at a neighbor's home. At 4:40 p.m., their father Gary arrives.
As soon as he got word of what happened, he raced home. I watched him run into the house. He was in shock. I mean, as you can imagine, uncontrollably crying.
According to the husband, nothing was taken relating to the care of the baby.
Gary quickly notices one item is missing, a banner that reads, "It's a girl."
He said it was a traditional celebratory banner of a new child, a longer banner, maybe 6 feet long.
Investigators excuse Gary to reunite with his children.
He took us all in his arms and held us. I don't think he really could say much in that moment.
For police, there is no time to waste.
We had children emotional. We had a husband who was completely broken up. We've got a young mother who's been executed in the house and a baby gone.
The baby would not survive long on its own if it was just left without any type of parental care. Given the urgency of this crime, police knew they had to find it immediately.
We couldn't find the baby. Was the baby taken out? Was it dumped? Is it going to be ransom? And we didn't know. The captain says, "What do you need?" And I said, "Everything."
Coming up, a community is on edge.
We had everybody that was available out searching.
Until a bizarre tip pays off.
While I was looking at the baby, I could tell that she had shaved her head.
Less than an hour after finding mother of four Sharon Parker dead from a gunshot wound, the search for her newborn is in high gear.
We had a murder and what appeared to be a kidnapping.
When you do have a missing baby, you have all the issues of the child getting food. Is the child safe? Is it sheltered? A lot of missing kids cases, they turn up under beds, in closets. So we certainly checked the cars and things of that nature.
There was a hurried rush to get people searching for the child. We had helicopters. We probably had at least half the department out. We had everybody that was available out searching.
As part of the on-foot search, detectives reach out to neighbors. One reports seeing a suspicious vehicle around 9:45 that morning.
She told investigators that a faded red hatchback vehicle pulled up into the Parker driveway.
According to the witness, a woman got out of the vehicle and went inside the home.
She had dark hair, approximately 5'8" to 5'9".
Now, law enforcement must prioritize tracking down the mystery visitor.
We did a composite on the face, and although it was from a distance, it gave us a basic starting point, and that went to the news media who put it out that day.
As the search continues, crime scene techs process the Parker home, starting with Sharon's body.
I noticed blood on the top of her head, so I assumed it was a small caliber gunshot. All indications to me as a crime scene technician was she died pretty quick.
You're checking the house to see if there was any forced entry. You're checking to see if there's obvious theft that may have occurred.
Nothing appeared out of place. It would indicate to us that the person was either known or invited in.
She had one leg tucked under the other, which meant she was comfortable in the environment. She absolutely knew the perpetrator.
Investigators head to the station where the Parker family is waiting. 14-year-old Heather is accompanied by her aunt into the interrogation room.
I wanted to interview the 14-year-old daughter, Heather. You hear things that go on with family, and you know what's going on in that house. She was very composed. She's very smart and articulate. I asked her background information about the family.
Instinctively, detectives press young Heather for anything she can offer, and she gives them compelling information.
A few days before my mom was murdered, someone Gary worked with named Stephanie had come to the house to meet the baby. While she was there, my mother came to talk to me because she wasn't very happy that he had brought his coworker over to meet the baby.
According to Heather, Stephanie was Gary's supervisor.
Heather said that they spent a lot of time together and that her mother, Heather's mother, was at times upset over that. And so there was an ongoing issue. Heather would hear her mother and her stepfather argue sometimes about the amount of time that the father was spending with his boss. They even traveled to Daytona.
I believe I was in shock. As an adult, I understand, but as a child, I didn't understand why I was being asked all those questions.
Now eager to hear directly from Gary, investigators interview him next.
Was he at work all day? Who can verify that? Where was he? What was he doing?
Gary gave his alibi of where he was, and Gary stated that during the time of this offense, he was at work and then at a bar. During the interview, I asked Gary if there was any financial issues, any indicators that would be stressors, and we found nothing that was significant.
And when police press Gary about his work, he makes no mention of Stephanie.
He wasn't forthcoming, and then toward the end of the interview, I somewhat challenged him regarding his relationship with his boss. He said, I really didn't want to tell you about my boss and those things that were going on because I thought you would think that this was involved. Gary was spending a lot of time with his boss, but there was never any information that they had a relationship. And he said, I also forgot to tell you I do have a small caliber firearm under the seat in my truck outside. And that was important because we obviously knew that it was a small caliber type pistol that was used in this crime. But he gave me the firearm, turned it over to us.
After more than 3 hours of questioning, police let Gary go.
We couldn't eliminate him because of the fact that he did have a firearm and that he wasn't 100% truthful in the beginning.
The next day, investigators gain more insight when the medical examiner confirms Sharon's cause of death.
It wasn't point blank, but it was a close range shot to the back of the head.
The projectile was retrieved from Miss Parker's head area. It was a .25 caliber.
Which means the pistol Sharon's husband Gary turned over to police, a .22, is not the murder weapon. Gary's alibi also checks out.
He was at work and then at a bar, and all of that was checked, and he in fact was.
Gary's boss, Stephanie, is also interviewed and reveals she too was at work, eliminating both of them as suspects. With no apparent leads, the hunt for baby Julie turns desperate.
I remember sitting on the couch with Dad, and we're just, well, when's Mommy coming home? We thought that the hospital was going to fix her up.
My family tried to keep me from watching the news. I knew that they were having roadblocks and there was a search. I had almost been able to think that maybe none of this was real. It just kind of hit home that our mom wasn't coming back.
We enlisted and asked for help from the public. We have a murder. We have a child that's missing. If anybody reports anything unusual, contact Sheriff's Office immediately.
The media blitz initiated by the Sheriff's Department soon has their phones ringing off the hook.
We got over 100 leads.
Every one of them had to be tracked down. We had to get agents or detectives to go out and confirm or deny whether or not every one of them was valid.
But to investigators, there is one remaining lead that stands out.
Out of all the tips and leads that came in, one tip came in that there was a person that worked at Perkins Restaurant. His wife had claimed to have just had a baby. She didn't look like she had been pregnant.
Within 24 hours of the murder of Sharon Parker, one tip has caught the eye of law enforcement. Investigators speak to the tipster, an employee at the chain restaurant Perkins, Peggy Mason.
It was all over the news that a woman was killed and her baby was taken. So I was very aware of that. Betty Ann came into the restaurant that Thursday with the baby, and the hair stood up on the back of my neck.
Betty Ann is Betty Ann Kirk, wife to Peggy's fellow Perkins employee, Craig.
I'd known him for a couple of years. He was happy to find out that she was pregnant, and we all hoped for the best. I remember after he told us that, Betty Ann would come in, and we kept saying she's not getting very big, and he said, well, she's having the kidney issue. So I went out, and I saw the baby, and Betty kept cradling the baby. She wasn't letting anybody too close to it, and I kept pressing. I kept getting up on her. Betty, let me see, and I was telling her, Betty Ann, she's just beautiful.
Reluctantly, Betty allowed Peggy to get closer.
While I was looking at the baby, I could tell that Betty had shaved her head. I could see she had long, dark tuft of hair that she missed when she shaved her head. I said, Betty, I've got to get back to work. But I knew I was on the right track.
Peggy gives police a description of Betty Ann.
She had to be maybe 5'7", 5'8". And I said, she's got a red Subaru.
The details of the vehicle match the description given by the neighbor who saw a woman at Sharon's home on the day of the murder. The name Betty Kirk also rings a bell with one investigator.
I was actually working a case on her for check fraud. That's the only criminal background I know. I had never suspected her of anything like this.
Betty Ann Kirk was born here in Florida on November 7th, 1958, and grew up in the area.
Betty's first marriage was a whirlwind of trauma and abuse.
Betty had 2 children from a previous relationship that didn't work. They fought every single night, and it was constant, and it was harsh.
In 1981, Child Protective Services placed her children in foster care.
DHS actually took her son away after one of these battery incidents and put him in foster care.
Betty divorced her first husband, and in 1982, she met Craig Kirk.
Betty met Craig when she was living here in Fort Myers, and this was the love of her life. She was just so smitten.
The couple officially tied the knot in 1983, but newlywed bliss quickly faded. From the start, the family faced financial challenges caring for 2 children under 5.
Craig was struggling because he was working as a cook at a local Perkins restaurant, but not bringing in very much money. And at the time, she was uneducated and not able to get a lot of opportunities for employment.
Despite her unemployment, Betty was a passionate volunteer.
Betty Kirk loved children. She was a Girl Scout troop leader.
Eventually, Betty found a way to turn her love of working with children into a paycheck.
She was a clown with a local clown troupe, and she would perform at birthday parties and shopping malls, painting kids' faces, etc.
Despite her happy persona, Betty and Craig struggled to make ends meet, leading Betty at times to take desperate measures.
She had written some fraudulent checks and cashed them at the grocery store.
Within a year, Betty made a surprising announcement.
In the summer of 1989, Betty announced that she was pregnant. The couple began buying clothes and a crib.
Once she told us that she was pregnant, I started the count. And where every woman will go 40 weeks for a pregnancy, Betty Ann was at 43. It just kept going.
But on March 29th of 1990, Betty and Craig announced the birth of their daughter, Laura Velta Kirk.
Some of the Perkins restaurant employees thought it was strange because she had a child the same day as the murder.
The baby's birthday occurring the same day as Sharon's murder is a coincidence investigators cannot dismiss.
So we got a detective go out and investigate that lead.
When he told me the name, then it immediately registered to me because I knew the name from my check fraud case I was working.
He heads first to the restaurant where Betty's husband Craig is a cook. Neither Betty nor Craig are there.
I tried to talk to the employees, and their stories were all about the same.
By March of 1990, Craig's coworkers were beyond suspicious.
She didn't gain too much weight, and her belly didn't pop out the way a pregnant belly would.
Craig had come to work the day before and said he thought Betty Ann was going to have the baby. Soon, very soon.
The next day, Betty shows up to visit the restaurant with a brand new baby girl.
We have a missing baby, and all of a sudden one shows up. Big red flags go up.
With baby Julie missing for 24 hours, there is no time to waste. Investigators race to the home of Betty Ann Kirk.
When police arrive at the Kirk trailer, it's in bad condition.
There was clothes piled up. There was what I call debris on the counters. Some of the beds were literally had no frame. They were on the floor. It was a filthy environment.
Adding to their concern, Betty's husband Craig seems to be drunk and is only able to answer basic questions.
Craig is sitting in this bar area just drinking, and it just seems like he's already drunk.
Craig confirmed that his wife had recently, the day prior, delivered the baby.
Betty Kirk came out of her bedroom, which was to the back, and we started asking her questions about the baby. She had said that she went to the health department, had the baby there, and they sent her directly home.
Betty Kirk gave an explanation that she had the baby at the health department on Michigan Avenue. We knew that the health department on Michigan Avenue doesn't deliver babies.
They press Betty for proof that the baby is hers.
She told police she couldn't find the birth certificate.
My concern was the baby's safety, where the baby was. We kept asking her questions and eventually got around to could we see the baby. Well, she brought the baby out to show it to us. It was wrapped in a blanket when I saw it.
Another investigator, his kids were still rather young, so he remembers the difference between an actual newborn and somebody being 10 or 12 or 14 days old, more alert, more awake, eyes open.
It obviously wasn't born day before yesterday.
30 hours into the investigation of the murder of Sharon Parker and the search for now 11-day-old missing baby Julie, police in Lehigh, Florida suspect that the newborn in Betty Ann Kirk's home may not be her own.
I was concerned for the child, but at that point we couldn't really do a lot about it until we did some follow-up and either verified her story or discredited her story. And we excused ourselves and left.
One officer conducts surveillance near Betty Kirk's home, while the other reports back to his supervisor.
He went about a half mile away and had to use a payphone. There was no cell phones back then. And he called my lieutenant and gave him a full briefing on what was happening.
When we went to make phone calls, try to verify some of this information, we could not.
Betty is claiming that she gave birth on March 29th of 1990 at the health department, which they have no facility for a woman to give birth. So investigators checked every hospital, every clinic in the area, and there was no record of Betty Kirk giving birth.
Meanwhile, the officer keeping watch over the Kirk home notes alarming activity.
I started seeing a shadow come out of the house, go to the car, made about 3 or 4 trips, appeared to be carrying something.
It was Betty Kirk. Jack got on the radio and said, Betty is leaving.
She came out and got in the car and drove directly in front of me. I followed her, and about 1.5 miles or so away, we made a vehicle stop on her vehicle.
The baby isn't in the vehicle, but the officer does find reason to believe their suspect may be running away.
She had a couple of baskets of clothes, a couple of bags of clothes. She had said she was going to a store. The store, she mentioned, I knew it was closed because of the hour. It was 10 or 11 o'clock at night.
Investigators aren't letting Betty out of sight.
They asked Betty if she was willing to go to headquarters for an interview, and she agreed.
I got very concerned about the infant being left at the house with an intoxicated person. So I went back to the house to check on the safety of the child.
The baby is with Betty's husband, Craig.
When I got there, the gentleman was still there and was still drinking. Well, I do not believe he could take care of an infant. At that point, the protocol changes. Now have an endangered child. We called in the troops at that point. DCFS got involved. We secured everything while they completed their investigation.
We had Health and Rehabilitative Services go and take custody of the child, and they brought the child to Lee Memorial Hospital for observation and examination.
Before detectives interview Betty Kirk, they question her husband. Craig is adamant he had every reason to believe his wife was pregnant.
She went 3 times to the doctor, but her husband, he thought was prenatal care.
She even told her husband that he couldn't sleep in the bed with her because she needed the extra space for her pregnant belly.
As for the day of the murder and the alleged birth of his child, Craig has an alibi.
I had learned that Craig Kirk was working all day the day of the murder, so his alibi was easily accountable.
Investigators ask Craig if Betty has a gun, and he tells them yes, a .25 caliber handgun, but he says he hasn't seen it in a while.
The gun used to kill Sharon was a .25 caliber, which isn't the most common, but this is the exact type of gun that Betty owned.
After confirming his alibi, Craig is released with no charges. Next, investigators question Betty, now pressing her on what she knows about Sharon Parker. In a surprise move, Betty admits she knew Sharon.
Betty claims that she and Sharon are actually friends. Betty told investigators that she met Sharon at a shopping mall when she was dressed as a clown.
Betty would dress up as a clown, and that's where Betty Kirk met Sharon Parker.
According to Betty, she got to know Sharon while painting the twins' faces.
The two women had bonded because Betty had told Sharon she was also pregnant.
They exchanged phone numbers, and they began to befriend each other.
According to Betty, when she read the birth announcement for Sharon's baby in the newspaper on March 29th, she decided to congratulate her friend in person.
Betty Kirk said that she went to the house and that she was invited in, and Sharon Parker was sitting in a chair.
They spoke for a while. At one point, Betty said she was thirsty. A short distance away was a convenient type store, and Sharon gave her $1 and said, "Get me a candy bar as well." Betty Kirk left for a short period, got a Pepsi or Coke, and came back with the candy bar.
Betty says when she returned from the store and reached into her purse for Sharon's change, a horrible accident ensued.
Betty says that she regularly carries a handgun in her purse for protection.
The pistol fell out of her purse. She grabbed it, and the gun went off. She shot Sharon Parker in the back of the head, but she explained it away as an accident.
When it accidentally went off and hit Sharon, she panicked and just grabbed the baby and fled.
As to her extended pregnancy, detectives learned that there was an unfortunate explanation.
Betty is claiming that she had the miscarriage, but she continued to pretend like she was pregnant.
A lot of the positive attention and things that she was receiving that was making her feel optimistic about her future and happy about her life was taken away, and so she didn't want that to end.
The forensics don't match Betty's version of events.
The angle at which the gun was used to fire couldn't possibly have been from an accident. It wasn't like you accidentally stand above somebody behind them and shoot at them. So at this point, police have enough to arrest her, even though she's still maintaining that it was an accident.
Less than 2 days after the investigation began, Betty Ann Kirk is booked and stops talking.
Betty invoked her right to remain silent and get an attorney.
Coming up, a joyous reunion.
All I ever heard was what a great mother she was.
And to prove their case, police pieced together a diabolical plan.
It looked as if she might have been shopping for a baby.
Year-old Betty Kirk is in custody for allegedly murdering young mother Sharon Parker and kidnapping her baby, Julie. Betty claims the shooting was an accident.
She was just hanging out at Sharon's house because they were friends, and in the midst of this, the gun just went off.
After her arrest, investigators search her car.
There was a .25 caliber handgun found in Betty Kirk's car, and the projectile was retrieved from Miss Parker's head. It was a .25 caliber.
The gun isn't the only damning evidence.
There was It's a Girl banner that was found. There was some clothing and little trinkets and stuff that were gifted to my mother from her baby showers.
There was a stack of several newspapers with birth announcements.
It appeared to have, I believe, 5 or 6 different births circled on it.
Sharon was one of the people that were circled.
It looked as if she might have been shopping for a baby.
Investigators followed up with the other women whose names were circled in the newspaper, and one of these women told investigators that Betty Kirk actually did show up at her house claiming to be a healthcare worker. Investigators believe that Betty was just going to keep going down the list until somebody with a baby let her in the house.
The baby found in Betty's custody is positively identified as Julie Parker.
I went with my stepdad and Josh and Jake to the sheriff's department where we picked her up, and we were very happy to have our sister back.
The only thing I'm sure of is that it happened. It was just kind of known in my family. People just talked about it openly. For a lot of my childhood, I felt very guilty. Like if I weren't born, that wouldn't have happened and she'd still be here and all my siblings would still have their mother. All I ever heard was what a great person she was, what a great, specifically mother she was, that her passion in life was her children.
On March 30th, Betty pleads innocent to charges of first-degree murder and kidnapping. As prosecutors prepare for trial, they delve into Betty's motive by speaking to those close to the couple.
Craig and Betty weren't getting along, and he told her he was thinking about leaving her. There was always fighting, they never had money, and so he was already considering leaving.
Betty was determined to see him stay.
She was trying to get pregnant to entrap Craig to stay in their relationship.
They tried to get pregnant for a long time, and she eventually did get pregnant in the summer of 1989, but she miscarried in December of that year.
At that point, she had told people that she was pregnant, friends, family, and it was time to either confess that she wasn't telling the truth or get a baby. She chose the latter.
"14 months after the murder, the case nears trial. Staring down a possible death sentence, Betty weighs her options.
Betty Ann Kirk ultimately pled no contest to first-degree murder. She was later sentenced to life in prison.
In order to avoid additional trauma, my family decided to accept that plea bargain.
I just heard she was this amazing, ideal person, and, that everybody's blessed to know. And I unfortunately missed the chance, and how sorry everybody felt for me that I didn't get to experience that.
This lady didn't just steal my mom, she stole my joy. And I had to find it in my heart, and do like Jesus did, and to be able to give some sort of forgiveness. That way I could be free.
A lot of people get to call their mom and tell them about things. I never got to do that. She don't get to meet my kids, but not a day goes by I don't think about her.
The quiet landscapes of Southwest Florida have long served as a sanctuary for those seeking a peaceful, close-knit community where children can grow up with a sense of security and freedom. In the late 80s and early 90s, Lehigh Acres, situated just outside the growing city of Fort Myers in Lee County, was precisely this kind of haven. It was a place characterized by spacious yards, quiet dead-end streets, and a general atmosphere of mutual trust among neighbors. The population was modest, and the natural pine, flatwoods, and cypress heads offered a secluded backdrop for a generation of families who spent their weekends camping in their backyards, swimming in outdoor pools, and enjoying the uncomplicated pleasures of small-town life. This was an era when doors were frequently left unlocked, when neighbors recognized each other as vehicles, and when the safety of one household was taken for granted. It was within this peaceful environment that the Parker family established their home, cherishing the quiet routines of their daily lives. Sharon Parker, a 33-year-old billing coordinator at Charterglade Hospital, was the heart of this household. Known by her friends and family as an exceptionally dedicated mother, Sharon had always prioritized her children above all else. Her eldest daughter, Heather, born when Sharon was 19 years old, was a mature and responsible teenager who acted as a secondary caretaker for her younger siblings, following her marriage to Gary Parker, a hardworking carpenter and supervisor for Lee Builders. In the year 1983, the family expanded to include twin sons, Joshua and Jacob, born a year later. The boys shared an inseparable bond, navigating their childhood as a team in the safe confines of their suburban neighborhood. In March of the year 1990, the household was filled vacep, eye to hat, fresh joy and anticipation, following the birth of a new daughter, Julie Lynn Parker, on the 19th of that month. Weighing 7 pounds with a full head of dark hair, the newborn was the center of attention, representing a bright new chapter for the family of 6. However, this idyllic existence was abruptly shattered. On the afternoon of March 29, the year 1990, leaving a community in shock and a family forever altered. The tragic sequence of events began with the end of a typical school day. The 6-year-old twins, Joshua and Jacob, stepped off their school bus with the eager excitement typical of young boys returning home to share their daily adventures with their mother. As they approached their front door, they expected the familiar warmth of their mother's greeting. Instead, they stepped into an unsettling silence. Upon entering the living room, they observed their mother slumped over in her recliner. At first glance, the young boys assumed she was simply asleep, a reasonable conclusion given the exhaustion that often accompanies caring for a 10-day-old infant. But as they drew closer, the reality of the situation became terrifyingly apparent. They noticed a pool of fluid on the floor and a severe injury to her head. The confusion and fear that gripped the 6-year-old siblings in that moment was profound. Lacking the maturity to fully comprehend the finality of what they were witnessing, they began searching the house for their baby sister, Julie. The infant, who should have been resting nearby or crying for attention, was nowhere to be found. Distressed and uncertain of what to do next, the twins retreated outside to the driveway, waiting anxiously for their 14-year-old sister, Heather, to arrive on her school bus. When Heather stepped off her bus moments later, she immediately noticed her younger brothers standing outside, visibly shaken. When they explained that they believed their mother was dead, Heather rushed into the house to investigate. The sight that greeted her in the living room confirmed her worst fears. Her mother was gone, and her newborn sister was missing from her bassinet, demonstrating remarkable presence of mind for a 14-year-old under extreme duress. Heather immediately ran to every room in the house in a desperate search for the baby. Realizing the gravity of the situation, she dialed the emergency telephone line to summon help, and then gathered her younger brothers to walk to their nearby babysitter's residence, ensuring their physical safety while authorities were en route. The babysitter immediately contacted Gary Parker at his construction work site. Within minutes, first responders and patrol deputies from the Lee County Sheriff's Office arrived at the residence. They quickly determined that Sharon Parker had succumbed to her injuries and that an active abduction of a 10-day-old infant was underway. The peaceful neighborhood of Lehigh Acres was instantly transformed into a secured crime scene, and detectives, including veteran investigator Les Partington, were dispatched to unravel a mystery that would challenge the community's sense of security. The initial assessment of the crime scene revealed several critical details that would guide the early hours of the investigation. Sharon Parker was found in her reclining chair, with one leg tucked comfortably beneath her, a posture that strongly suggested she had been relaxed and comfortable in her environment prior to the incident. There were no signs of forced entry at the windows or doors, nor was there any indication of a struggle or ransacking of the household. This led crime scene technicians to hypothesize that the perpetrator was either someone Sharon knew or someone she had willingly invited into her home. The medical examiner later confirmed that Sharon had been killed by a single, close-range gunshot wound to the back of the head, delivered by a small-caliber weapon. Strikingly, while valuable household items remained untouched, indicating that robbery was not the motive, Gary Parker noticed that a 6-foot-long celebratory paper banner reading, "It's a girl," had been removed from the home, along with some baby clothing and items from recent baby showers. The realization that a newborn child had been taken, leaving her vulnerable and without sustenance, shifted the investigation into a state of utmost urgency. An all-points bulletin was issued, and a massive air and ground search was initiated, utilizing helicopters, canine units, and dozens of law enforcement officers to comb the surrounding woods, canals, and roadways. As the search intensified, investigators began the arduous process of interviewing family members, neighbors, and associates to identify potential suspects. Initially, everyone was considered a potential person of interest. When Gary Parker arrived at the scene, he was understandably overwhelmed with grief and shock. During his initial interview at the sheriff's headquarters, detectives pressed him for details regarding his schedule, his personal life, and any potential stressors within the household. Gary provided a verified alibi, explaining that he had been working at a construction site and had briefly visited a local establishment afterward. However, detectives noted a degree of hesitation when questioning him about his professional relationships. Eventually, Gary revealed that his supervisor at work was a woman named Stephanie, and that his close professional association with her had occasionally caused tension between him and Sharon. He explained that he had initially hesitated to mention this detail out of fear that investigators would misinterpret the situation. Furthermore, Gary volunteered that he possessed a small-caliber firearm beneath the seat of his truck. He immediately surrendered the weapon to the police. Forensic testing soon revealed, however, that Gary's firearm was a .22 caliber, whereas the projectile recovered from the victim was a .25 caliber. When investigators interviewed Stephanie, her alibi was also fully verified, effectively eliminating both Gary and his supervisor from suspicion. With the family cleared, investigators focused heavily on canvassing the neighborhood for any unusual activity on the morning of March 29. This effort quickly yielded a vital clue. A neighbor walking her dog reported seeing a faded red hatchback vehicle pull into the Parker driveway at aphmau, approximately 9:45 in the morning. The witness observed a dark-haired woman, estimated to be between 5 feet 8 inches and 5 feet 9 inches tall, exit the vehicle and approach the front door, where she was greeted and led inside. This observation was crucial, as it provided a physical description of a potential suspect and a vehicle of interest. Law enforcement artists immediately worked to create a composite sketch based on the witness's description, which was promptly distributed to local news media outlets to solicit help from the public. The media blitz proved highly effective, keeping the community on high alert and generating over 100 leads within the first 24 hours of the investigation. Among the influx of tips, one particular report stood out to detectives due to its highly unusual and specific nature. Peggy Mason, an employee at a local Perkins restaurant in Fort Myers, contacted the sheriff's office to report highly suspicious behavior involving a coworker's wife. Peggy explained that a cook at the restaurant, Kirk, had recently announced that his 31-year-old wife, Betty Ann Kirk, was pregnant. However, coworkers had harbored doubts about the pregnancy for months, noting that Betty Ann, who was approximately 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighed around 150 pounds, did not appear to be gaining weight in a manner consistent with a typical pregnancy. Despite their private skepticism, Craig had arrived at work on the day before the incident, expressing excitement that his wife was about to deliver their baby. The very next day, which coincided with the tragic passing of Sharon Parker, Betty Ann visited the restaurant to showcase a newborn baby girl, whom she claimed to have just delivered. Peggy Mason recounted her encounter with Betty Ann at the restaurant with a sense of profound unease. When she approached the infant, Betty Ann appeared unusually protective, cradling the child tightly and attempting to prevent anyone from getting too close. Driven by curiosity and a growing sense of suspicion, Peggy persisted, eventually getting a closer look at the baby. It was then that she noticed something deeply disturbing. The infant's head appeared to have been recently shaved, but a distinct dark tuft of hair remained near the back, which had apparently been missed. This physical anomaly, combined with the timing of the birth, immediately triggered a sense of alarm in Peggy, who was well aware of the news broadcasts regarding the abducted Parker infant. When Peggy asked Betty Ann about her physical recovery from childbirth, the answers she received were evasive and inconsistent. Furthermore, Peggy noted that Betty Ann drove a faded red Subaru hatchback, a vehicle that matched the description provided by the Parker family's neighbor. The name Betty Ann Kirk was immediately familiar to one of the investigating detectives, who was already conducting an active investigation into her for an unrelated check fraud case. This connection allowed authorities to quickly gather background information on the suspect. Born in Florida on November 7, the year 1958, Betty Ann had experienced a highly turbulent life. Her first marriage had been marked by instability and domestic distress, eventually leading the Department of Human Services to place her 2 older children into foster care in the year 1981. Following her divorce, she met Kirk in the year 1982, marrying him the following year. The marriage was plagued by severe financial difficulties, with Craig earning a modest wage as a restaurant cook and Betty Ann struggling to find steady employment. Despite these hardships, Betty Ann sought community validation, serving as a volunteer Girl Scout troop leader and performing as a clown named Sweetheart at children's birthday parties and local shopping malls. This volunteer work allowed her to project a wholesome, child-loving persona that stood in stark contrast to her underlying psychological instability. In the summer of the year 1989, Betty Ann announced to her husband, family, and friends that she was pregnant. For Craig, who had been contemplating leaving the marriage due to ongoing conflict and financial strain, the news was a source of great hope and a reason to stay. However, the reality behind this announcement was tragic. Investigators would later learn that Betty Ann had indeed conceived, but had suffered a miscarriage in December of that year. Fearing that the admission of the miscarriage would lead to the dissolution of her marriage and the loss of the positive attention she was receiving, Betty Ann made the fateful decision to conceal the loss. Over the next several months, she continued to simulate a pregnancy, using loose clothing and claiming medical complications to explain her lack of physical changes. As the fictional due date approached in late March, she found herself trapped in her own deception. With her husband expecting the imminent arrival of a child, Betty Ann realized she had to either confess the truth or obtain a baby by any means necessary. She chose the latter. Armed with this critical background information and the compelling tip from the Perkins restaurant, detectives dispatched officers to the Kirk residence, a worn mobile home in North Fort Myers. Upon arriving at the home, investigators observed highly concerning living conditions. The trailer was in a state of severe disarray, with piles of clothing, cluttered counters, and mattresses resting directly on the floor. Craig Kirk was present, appearing highly intoxicated and barely able to comprehend the officer's questions, though he confirmed that his wife had brought a newborn baby home the previous day. When Betty Ann emerged from a back bedroom, detectives questioned her about the circumstances of the birth. She claimed that she had delivered the baby at the local health department on Michigan Avenue and had been sent home immediately afterward. Detectives immediately recognized this claim as highly suspicious, as the public health department facility on Michigan Avenue did not possess the clinical resources to deliver babies and had never operated as a birthing center. When asked to produce a birth certificate or medical records to verify the birth, Betty Ann claimed she was unable to locate them. The detectives then requested to see the infant. When Betty Ann brought the child out, one of the investigators, who had young children of his own, immediately noticed that the baby's behavioral development was inconsistent. Ve kept to hat, that of a 24-hour-old newborn. The infant was highly alert, with her eyes open and responsive to her surroundings, exhibiting characteristics of a baby who was at least 10 to 12 days old. Despite their strong suspicions, the detectives had to follow strict legal protocols to ensure any subsequent evidence would be admissible in court. They excused themselves from the residence to verify Betty Ann's claims, leaving an officer stationed nearby to conduct surveillance on the mobile home. As investigators contacted every hospital, clinic, and medical facility in the region, they quickly confirmed that there was absolutely no record of Betty Ann Kirk giving birth anywhere in the area on or around March 29. Meanwhile, the surveillance officers stationed near the Kirk home observed suspicious activity in the darkness. Betty Ann was seen making multiple trips between her trailer and her vehicle, carrying baskets and bags of clothing, suggesting she was preparing to flee the area. As she pulled out of the driveway and began driving down the road, the officer initiated a traffic stop. Although the infant was not in the vehicle at that moment, the presence of multiple packed bags of clothing contradicted her claim that she was merely running a quick errand to a local store, which the officer knew to be closed at that late hour. Betty Ann was cooperative but evasive, and she agreed to accompany detectives to the sheriff's headquarters for a formal interview. Recognizing that the infant was left in the care of a severely intoxicated individual who was incapable of providing adequate supervision, detectives returned to the mobile home to secure the child. The Department of Children and Family Services was immediately contacted, and caseworkers took protective custody of the infant, transporting her to Lee Memorial Hospital for a thorough medical examination and observation. Back at the sheriff's headquarters, investigators began a parallel track of questioning, interviewing both Craig and Betty Ann in separate rooms. Craig remained adamant that he had fully believed his wife was pregnant, recounting how she had attended doctor appointments, purchased baby supplies, and even requested that he sleep in a separate bed to accommodate her supposedly delicate physical state. He also revealed that Betty Ann owned a .25 caliber handgun, though he claimed he had not seen it recently. Craig's employer and co-workers quickly verified his presence at the restaurant during the hours of the crime, confirming his innocence and leaving his wife to face the mounting evidence alone. During her interrogation, Betty Ann initially tried to maintain her deception, but as detectives presented the inconsistencies in her birth story and the lack of medical records, she began to alter her narrative. In a surprising admission, she acknowledged that she knew Sharon Parker, claiming they had met at a shopping mall the previous year when Betty Ann was performing as a clown and had painted the faces of Sharon's twin sons. She claimed they had bonded over their shared pregnancies and had exchanged contact information. Betty Ann asserted that on the morning of March 29, she had noticed Sharon's birth announcement in the newspaper and decided to visit her to offer congratulations. She claimed that during the visit, she left briefly to purchase beverages and a candy bar at a nearby convenience store. Upon her return, she claimed she reached into her purse to retrieve some change, which caused her .25 caliber handgun to fall out. According to Betty Ann, as she grabbed the falling weapon, it accidentally discharged, striking Sharon in the back of the head. Panicking at the realization of what had occurred, she claimed she grabbed the newborn infant and fled the scene in a state of shock. Forensic investigators and prosecutors quickly dismantled this claim of an accidental shooting. The physical evidence at the crime scene, including the trajectory of the bullet and the position of Sharon's body, completely contradicted the mechanics of an accidental discharge from a dropped purse. The weapon had been fired at close range, directly behind the victim, indicating a deliberate and targeted act rather than a random mishap. Furthermore, a subsequent search of Betty Ann's vehicle yielded highly incriminating evidence that proved a high degree of planning and premeditation inside the car. Detectives recovered the missing "It's a Girl" banner that had been taken from the Parker home, along with baby clothing and gifts that had been presented to Sharon at Mofi her baby showers. Most significantly, investigators discovered a stack of recent local newspapers. On the pages containing birth announcements, 5 or 6 specific listings had been circled in ink. Sharon Parker's name was among them. This discovery suggested that Betty Ann had been systematically searching for a newborn baby to claim as her own, using the public birth announcements as a shopping list. Investigators followed up with the other families whose listings had been circled. One of these mothers revealed that a dark-haired woman matching Betty Ann's description had actually appeared at her home, falsely presenting herself as a community healthcare worker in an attempt to gain entry. This chilling detail suggested that Sharon Parker was not targeted out of personal animosity, but rather because she happened to be the first mother on the list who opened her door and welcomed the visitor inside, relying on their prior brief acquaintance. The infant recovered from the Kirk home was positively identified as Julie Lynn Parker, and within 48 hours of the tragedy, she was safely reunited with her father and siblings. In May of the year 1991, approximately 14 months after the incident, the case was resolved without the added trauma of a lengthy public trial. Facing the prospect of a first-degree murder conviction and a potential death sentence, Betty Ann Kirk entered a plea of no contest to charges of first-degree murder and kidnapping. She was subsequently sentenced to life in prison, ensuring she would remain incarcerated for the remainder of her natural life. For the Parker family, the decision to accept the plea bargain was a difficult but necessary step to shield the young children from the emotional distress of testifying in court and reliving the details of their mother's passing. An analysis of this tragic case reveals a complex interplay of psychological desperation, relational strain, and a profound lack of healthy coping mechanisms. The primary motive for the crime was Betty Ann's desperate attempt to preserve her marriage. In many documented cases of infant abduction involving faked pregnancies, the perpetrator suffers from a deep-seated fear of abandonment. The announcement of a pregnancy often serves as a powerful tool to secure a partner's commitment and garner positive attention from social circles. When a miscarriage occurs, the emotional devastation is compounded by the terrifying prospect of losing that support and attention. For an individual with pre-existing psychological fragility, the inability to process this grief can lead to a state of denial, where they continue to act out the pregnancy, culminating in a desperate, criminal act as the fictional delivery date looms. This case highlights the critical importance of robust mental health support systems, particularly for individuals who experience reproductive loss. Providing accessible counseling and emotional resources can help prevent the onset of severe psychological distress and the dangerous delusions that can arise from unresolved trauma. From an investigative standpoint, the rapid resolution of this case underscores several key strategies that are vital in abduction and major crime investigations. The first is the critical importance of rapid public communication. By promptly releasing a detailed description of the suspect's vehicle and a composite sketch to the media, the sheriff's office kept the community engaged and vigilant, directly leading to the crucial tip from Peggy Mason. Secondly, the case demonstrates the value of verifying administrative and medical records early in an investigation. By immediately checking with local healthcare facilities regarding the suspect's ends of claims of childbirth, detectives were able to swiftly expose her deception and establish probable cause. Lastly, the coordination between local patrol officers, detectives, and Child Protective Services ensured that the vulnerable infant was rescued safely and placed in a secure environment without delay. The tragic passing of Sharon Parker left an enduring void in the lives of her family, yet it also revealed a profound story of resilience, survival, and the enduring power of family bonds. For the children, growing up without their mother was an immense challenge, marked by feelings of grief, confusion, and at times unearned guilt. Yet, the memory of Sharon as a devoted, loving mother who cherished her family above all else remained a guiding light for her children. In the years that followed, the family worked to heal, finding the strength to support one another, and eventually discovering the path to emotional peace. Through their shared resilience, they honored their mother's legacy, ensuring that her warmth, love, and devotion would continue to live on through the generations. The human mind is capable of constructing elaborate labyrinths of deception, but perhaps none are as tragic or deeply unsettling as those built upon the desperate desire for a child. In the quiet corners of the psychological landscape, a phenomenon exists where the normal human longing for family and maternal connection becomes warped by deep emotional insecurity, fear of abandonment, and a profound detachment from reality. This dark manifestation often begins with a seemingly minor fabrication, such as a feigned pregnancy, designed to secure the affection of a partner or to prevent a relationship from collapsing. Over time, as the weeks pass and the fictitious due date approaches, the perpetrator finds themselves trapped in a prison of their own making. The initial lie, which may have brought temporary comfort, positive attention, and a sense of security, begins to demand a physical resolution. Faced with the imminent exposure of their deceit, some individuals experience a terrifying psychological escalation, transitioning from passive falsehood to calculated, violent action. This rare but horrific path is what leads to the dark phenomenon of infant abduction and maternal homicide, where a perpetrator decides that the only way to sustain their illusion is to steal a newborn baby from an unsuspecting mother. To understand why these tragic cases occur vekep, some frequency across different communities, one must examine the profound psychological pressures that drive them. In many instances, the perpetrator has suffered a genuine miscarriage or struggled with infertility, experiences that can cause immense grief and a sense of personal failure. When these struggles are compounded by a highly unstable relationship or an intense fear that a partner will leave, the psychological stakes become dangerously high. The perpetrator may come to believe that a baby is the only anchor that can save their domestic life. Once the false pregnancy is announced to friends, family, and coworkers, a powerful momentum is created. The community rallies around the expectant mother with gifts, baby showers, and celebratory wishes, which reinforces the lie and makes confession seem completely impossible. The perpetrator cannot bear the immense shame, social ruin, and loss of affection that would accompany the truth. As the 40-week gestation period nears its end, the psychological pressure reaches a boiling point, and the individual begins to seek out a physical baby to present to the world. Viewing other mothers not as fellow human beings, but as obstacles to be bypassed or sources of the prize they so desperately need to claim. The peaceful community of Lehigh Acres, located just outside of Fort Myers in Lee County, Florida, seemed an unlikely stage for such a chilling psychological drama. In the late 80s and early 90s, Lehigh Acres was a tranquil, sprawling suburb characterized by its secluded nature, pine trees, and a slow, comfortable pace of life. It was a place where families moved to escape the noise of larger cities, where children spent their afternoons playing outdoors in the warm Florida sunshine, and where neighbors knew and trusted one another. The residents enjoyed a quiet, small-town vibe, often leaving their front doors unlocked and welcoming visitors with open arms. It was within this peaceful enclave that the Parker family had established their home. Sharon Parker, a 33-year-old mother, was highly regarded by everyone who knew her as a dedicated, loving, and fashionable woman whose entire life revolved around her children. She had experienced the challenges of young motherhood, having given birth to her oldest daughter, Heather, in 1976, and later finding stability and deep happiness when she married Gary Parker, a hard-working carpenter and supervisor, in 1983. The Parker family tree had grown beautifully in their quiet neighborhood. A year after their wedding, Sharon and Gary welcomed twin sons, Jacob and Joshua, who filled the home with laughter and energy. The household was a tight-knit unit where everyone supported one another, with 14-year-old Heather acting almost as a second mother to her younger brothers. In early 1990, the family received the joyous news that Sharon was expecting another daughter, a prospect that filled the entire household with immense anticipation. On March 19, 1990, baby Julie Lynn was born, a healthy 7-pound infant with a full head of dark hair. The family was complete, and the home was filled with the sweet, busy chaos of caring for a 10-day-old newborn. There was no reason for anyone to suspect that this period of pure joy would be shattered so abruptly, or that the innocence of this small-town environment would be lost forever on a warm spring afternoon. On the afternoon of March 29, 1990, only 10 days after baby Julie was born, 6-year-old twins Jacob and Joshua returned home from school on their usual bus, excited to share the stories of their school day. With their mother, the young boys hurried to the front door and called out for her as they entered the house. What they encountered inside was a scene that would forever alter their lives. In the living room, Sharon was slumped over in her favorite reclining chair. Initially, the young children believed their mother was simply taking a nap, but as they stepped closer, they noticed a pool of blood on the floor and a severe wound to her head. Confused and deeply frightened, the twins began to search the house for their newborn sister, Julie, expecting to hear her crying or to find her in her crib. The house was completely silent, and the baby was nowhere to be found. Unsure of what to do, the two young boys walked back outside to wait for their older sister, Heather, to arrive on her school bus. When 14-year-old Heather stepped off her bus, she was surprised to see her little brothers standing outside, waiting for her vie-capite, hot, pale faces and anxious expressions. They told her that they believed their mother was dead, prompting a wave of panic to wash over the teenager. Heather rushed into the house and was met with the horrifying sight of her mother, slumped in the recliner. In that moment of absolute shock and grief, Heather was unable to determine exactly what had happened, but she knew instantly that her mother was gone and that her tiny baby sister was missing. Showing remarkable presence of mind for a teenager, Heather ran through every room in the house to search for Julie, and when she confirmed the baby was gone, she picked up the telephone to call the emergency number. She then gathered her younger brothers and walked quickly to their babysitter's house nearby, seeking safety and assistance in a situation that was far beyond their comprehension. The babysitter immediately attempted to contact Gary Parker at his construction job, while first responders and law enforcement officers were dispatched to the Parker residence. When the patrol officers and detectives arrived, they quickly realized that they were dealing with a double tragedy of the most urgent nature: a brutal maternal homicide and the active kidnapping of an 11-day-old infant. Detective Les Partington and his fellow investigators from the Lee County Sheriff's Office immediately secured the crime scene, taking care not to disturb any physical evidence while conducting a thorough search of the house, closets, and surrounding property to ensure the baby had not been hidden or left nearby. The realization that a tiny, vulnerable infant had been taken from her mother's side sent a shockwave through the entire police force. A newborn child cannot survive long without proper nourishment, shelter, and parental care, making the search for Julie Lynn a desperate race against the clock. As an all-points bulletin was broadcast to law enforcement agencies across the region, crime scene technicians began the meticulous process of examining Sharon Parker's body and the surrounding environment for clues. Sharon was found leaning to her left in the reclining chair, with blood dripping from a wound at the back of her head onto the carpet. The technicians determined that she had been shot at close range with a small caliber firearm, and all indications suggested that her death had been swift. Crucially, there were no signs of forced entry at the residence, and nothing of high monetary value appeared to have been stolen. Sharon was found with one leg tucked comfortably beneath her, a relaxed posture that strongly indicated she was completely comfortable in her surroundings when the attack occurred. To the experienced investigators, this physical detail spoke volumes. Sharon almost certainly knew her attacker and had invited them into her home, never suspecting the danger they posed. While search teams, helicopters, and tracking dogs scoured the area, investigators began interviewing neighbors and looking for any unusual activity in the vicinity on the morning of the crime. Their efforts quickly yielded a significant lead when a neighbor who had been walking her dog reported seeing a faded red hatchback vehicle pull into the Parker driveway at Mof, approximately 9:45 in the morning. The witness described seeing a dark-haired woman standing approximately 5 feet 8 inches to 5 feet 9 inches tall, exit the vehicle and walk toward the front door. Based on this description, law enforcement artists compiled a composite sketch of the female suspect, which was immediately distributed to local news media outlets to enlist the help of the public in identifying the mysterious visitor. At the police station, detectives conducted sensitive interviews with the grieving family members to uncover any potential conflicts or hidden dynamics. 14-year-old Heather, accompanied by her aunt, proved to be an invaluable source of information. She revealed that a few days prior to the tragedy, a female coworker of Gary S. named Stephanie had come to the house to meet the newborn baby. Heather explained that Sharon had been quite upset about this visit, as there had been ongoing domestic tension and arguments between Sharon and Gary regarding the amount of time he was spending with his supervisor, including a joint trip to Daytona. This revelation immediately directed the detectives' attention toward Gary Parker and his coworker, raising the possibility of a domestic dispute that had escalated to violence. When detectives interviewed Gary Parker, they found him deeply broken and in a state of shock, but they also noticed certain omissions in his initial statements. He provided an alibi, stating that he had been at work and then at a local establishment, but he was initially hesitant to discuss his supervisor, Stephanie. Under gentle pressure, Gary admitted that he had withheld information about his working relationship because he feared investigators would immediately suspect him of involvement in the crime. He also revealed that he kept a small caliber firearm under the seat of his truck parked outside, which he willingly turned over to the authorities. Given that Sharon had been killed with a small caliber weapon, this firearm was immediately sent for ballistic testing. The next day, the medical examiner provided critical forensic evidence that dramatically shifted the direction of the investigation. The autopsy confirmed that Sharon had been killed by a close-range gunshot wound to the back of her head, and the projectile retrieved from the scene was determined to be a .25 caliber bullet. This finding immediately eliminated Gary S. .22 caliber handgun as the murder weapon. Furthermore, detectives thoroughly verified Gary's alibi, confirming through work records and witnesses that he was indeed at his construction site and the local establishment during the time frame of the murder. Investigators also interviewed Stephanie, whose alibi was fully corroborated, eliminating both her and Gary as suspects and forcing the police to look elsewhere for the person responsible for Sharon S.'s death and Julie S.'s disappearance. With over half of the Sheriff's Department dedicated to the search, the media campaign began to generate a massive response from the public, resulting in more than 100 tips flowing into the command center. Each lead had to be systematically tracked down and verified by detectives who knew that every passing hour reduced the chances of finding the infant safe. Amidst this deluge of information, one specific tip stood out as highly unusual and compelling. An employee named Peggy Mason, who worked at a local Perkins restaurant, contacted the authorities to report some highly suspicious behavior involving a fellow employee's wife. Peggy explained that a cook at the restaurant, Kirk, had proudly announced several months earlier that his wife, Betty Ann, was pregnant. However, as the months passed, Peggy and her coworkers noticed that Betty Ann's physical appearance did not seem to change in the way a typical pregnancy would, despite her claims that she was experiencing kidney issues that affected her weight gain. The suspicion reached a peak when Betty Ann's alleged pregnancy extended to an improbable 43 weeks. On March 29, 1990, the very day Sharon Parker was murdered, Betty Ann called the restaurant to announce that she had successfully given birth to a baby girl whom she and Craig named Laura Velta. The very next day, Betty Ann walked into the Perkins restaurant to show off the newborn baby to her husband's co-workers. Peggy Mason, who was deeply aware of the media reports regarding the stolen infant in Lehigh Acres, went over to congratulate Betty Ann and get a closer look at the child. As Peggy looked at the baby, she noticed something that sent a chill down her spine. The baby's head had been shaved, but a small dark tuft of hair had been missed near the crown. Peggy immediately recalled that the missing baby Julie's was described as having a full head of dark hair. When Peggy asked to see the baby more closely, Betty Ann appeared defensive, cradling the child tightly and preventing anyone from getting too close. Peggy also knew that Betty Ann drove a faded red Subaru, which perfectly matched the neighbor's description of the vehicle seen at the Parker home. This critical tip was immediately routed to a detective who recognized the name Betty Ann Kirk from an active check fraud investigation he was conducting. Betty Ann, born on November 7, 1958, had a history of personal instability and legal troubles. Her first marriage had been marked by severe domestic conflict, leading to Child Protective Services, placing her older children in foster care in 1981. After divorcing her first husband, she met Craig Kirk in 1982, and the couple married the following year. Despite their deep affection for one another, the family struggled with hot persistent financial difficulties as Craig worked as a low-wage cook, and Betty Ann remained largely unemployed, occasionally volunteering as a Girl Scout troop leader and performing as a clown named Sweetheart at children's birthday parties and local shopping malls. Armed with this background and the highly specific details provided by the restaurant tip, detectives rushed to the mobile home of Betty Ann and Craig Kirk in North Fort Myers. Upon entering the residence, the officers were struck by the extremely neglected and unsanitary conditions of the trailer, with clothes piled high, cluttered counters, and mattresses resting directly on the floor. Craig Kirk was present, but appeared highly intoxicated, barely able to answer the detectives' questions. He confirmed that his wife had recently delivered a baby, and when Betty Ann emerged from a back bedroom, she claimed she had given birth the previous day at the Michigan Avenue Health Department and had been immediately sent home with her child. The investigators immediately recognized several glaring falsehoods in her story. The health department facility on Michigan Avenue did not possess any maternity or delivery services, making her claim of giving birth there an impossibility. When detectives asked to see the child, Betty Ann reluctantly brought out the infant, who was wrapped tightly in a blanket. One of the investigators, who had young children of his own, closely observed the baby's developmental physical features. He noted that the infant was highly alert, with her eyes wide open and showing coordination that was far too advanced for a newborn who had allegedly been born just 30 hours prior. The baby appeared to be closer to 10 or 12 days old, perfectly aligning with the age of the missing Julie Lynn Parker. Realizing they needed to verify their findings without alerting the suspect, the detectives politely excused themselves and departed the residence. While one detective went to a nearby payphone to brief his supervisor and check birth records at local hospitals, another officer established discreet surveillance on the mobile home. Within a short period, the watching detective observed a shadow moving in the darkness. Betty Ann Kirk was repeatedly walking between her trailer and her vehicle, carrying baskets and bags of clothing in what appeared to be a hurried attempt to pack up and flee. She got into her red Subaru and began driving away, prompting the surveillance officer to coordinate a traffic stop about 1.5 miles from the residence. Betty Ann was stopped and agreed to accompany the detectives to the police headquarters for further questioning. Meanwhile, because the father, Craig, was too intoxicated to care for an infant, and the home environment was deemed unsafe, the Department of Children and Family Services was called to take emergency custody of the baby. The child was immediately transported to Lee Memorial Hospital, where medical staff examined her and confirmed that she was indeed the missing 11-day-old Julie Lynn Parker. The joyous news of her safe recovery was quickly communicated to her father, Gary, and her siblings, bringing a glimmer of light to an otherwise dark and tragic situation. Back at the sheriff's headquarters, investigators began a double-track interrogation of the husband and wife. Craig Kirk was cooperative and appeared completely bewildered by the unfolding events. He insisted that he had fully believed his wife was pregnant, explaining that she had attended what he thought were prenatal doctor appointments, and had even requested that he sleep separately because she needed extra space for her growing belly. He also provided a solid alibi, proving he was working at the restaurant throughout the day of the murder, which eliminated him from any physical involvement in the crime. Crucially, when asked if Betty Ann owned any firearms, Craig revealed that she possessed a .25 caliber handgun, though he had not seen it in some time. When detectives turned their attention to Betty Ann, she initially attempted to construct a narrative that painted her as a victim of a bizarre accident. She admitted that she knew Sharon Parker, claiming they had met at a shopping mall where she was performing as a clown and had painted the twins' faces. She stated that they had bonded over their shared pregnancies and exchanged phone numbers. Betty Ann claimed that upon reading Sharon S.'s birth announcement in the newspaper, she decided to visit her friend to offer congratulations. She claimed that during the visit, Sharon gave her $1 to go to a nearby store to purchase a soda and a candy bar. According to Betty Ann, when she returned and reached into her purse to retrieve Sharon's change, her .25 caliber handgun accidentally slipped out. She claimed that, as she reached to catch the falling weapon, it discharged, striking Sharon in the back of the head. Panicking at the sight of her friend's death, she claimed she grabbed the baby and fled the scene. This elaborate explanation was quickly dismantled by forensic science and the physical evidence recovered from Betty Ann's vehicle. The medical examiner confirmed that the trajectory of the bullet and the absence of certain defensive or irregular markings indicated a deliberate, close-range execution, making the theory of an accidental discharge from a falling purse physically impossible. Furthermore, a thorough search of Betty Ann's Subaru yielded a wealth of incriminating evidence, including the .25 caliber murder weapon, the S, a girl's celebratory banner stolen from the Parker home, baby clothing, and gifts that had been presented to Sharon at her baby shower. Most chillingly, detectives discovered a stack of recent newspapers with several birth announcements circled in ink. Sharon S.'s name was among them, but so were several other local mothers who had recently given birth. Investigators contacted the other women whose names had been circled in the newspapers. One of these mothers revealed that a woman matching Betty Ann's description had actually shown up at her home a few days prior to the murder, claiming to be a community healthcare worker and attempting to gain entry to see the newborn baby. This terrifying detail exposed the true predatory nature of Betty Ann's plan. She had been systematically baby shopping, combed through local newspapers for birth announcements, and visited homes until she found a vulnerable mother who would let her inside. Her meeting with Sharon at the mall months earlier had provided her with the personal connection and trust she needed to easily bypass Sharon's natural maternal defenses. The true motive behind this horrific crime was rooted in the desperate deterioration of Betty Ann's marriage. Craig had been threatening to leave her due to their ongoing financial struggles and domestic conflict. In a desperate bid to force him to stay, Betty Ann falsely claimed she was pregnant in the summer of 1989. Although she did experience a genuine pregnancy, she suffered a miscarriage in December of that year. Terrified that the truth would cause Craig to abandon her, she chose to conceal the miscarriage, continuing the physical charade by stuffing her clothing and claiming health complications to explain her lack of typical weight gain. As the 9-month timeline drew to a close, she realized she had reached a point of no return. She had to either confess her deceit or produce a physical infant. She chose the latter, planning a cold, premeditated search for a baby that culminated in the execution of Sharon Parker. 14 months after her arrest, as prosecutors prepared to seek the death penalty in a highly publicized trial, Betty Ann Kirk chose to avoid a potential capital sentence by pleading no contest to charges of first-degree murder and kidnapping. She was subsequently sentenced to life in prison, bringing a solemn end to the legal proceedings and sparing the Parker family the additional trauma of a lengthy, graphic trial. While justice had been served, the scars left on the Parker children and their father were deep and permanent. A loving mother had been taken from them in an act of unfathomable selfishness, leaving a void that could never be filled. This tragic case offers profound life lessons and warnings for communities everywhere regarding the safety of new families and the warning signs of pathological behavior. In the era of the late 80s and early 90s, it was common practice for families to publish detailed birth announcements in local newspapers, listing the parents' names, the baby's birth date, and occasionally even their home address. Today, this case serves as a stark reminder of the potential dangers of sharing sensitive personal information publicly, a lesson that translates directly to the modern digital age where oversharing on social media can expose vulnerable families to bad actors. It highlights the absolute necessity of maintaining vigilance, securing residences, and verifying the credentials of any unexpected visitors, even those who present themselves under friendly or professional guises. Furthermore, this investigation highlights several critical strategies that can help law enforcement agencies resolve such complex and high-stakes cases more rapidly. The first is the invaluable power of community engagement and the rapid mobilization of public media. By immediately releasing a composite sketch of the suspect and the description of the vehicle, the Lee County Sheriff's Office empowered the local community to act as their eyes and ears, leading directly to the pivotal tip from Peggy Mason. Second, the case demonstrates the importance of close attention to physical anomalies and behavioral clues, such as the observant detective noticing the age and alertness of the infant, and Peggy noticing the shaved head with the missed tuft of dark hair. Finally, rapid interagency communication and the immediate checking of administrative records, such as verifying birth records at local health departments and clinics, are crucial in exposing the fabrications of a suspect before they have the opportunity to destroy evidence or flee the jurisdiction. Through a combination of meticulous police work, forensic science, and a vigilant community, the innocent baby Julie was safely returned to the arms of her family, demonstrating that even in the face of profound darkness, justice and human compassion will ultimately prevail. The peaceful community of Lehigh Acres, situated in the eastern portion of Lee County, just outside the city of Fort Myers, Florida, was known in the late 20th century as a tranquil haven. During the late 1980s and early 1990s, the area was not heavily populated, and many families chose to settle there to enjoy a quiet, secluded lifestyle. Neighbors knew one another. Children spent their afternoons playing outside, and families enjoyed a sense of safety that seemed nearly unshakable. It was within this peaceful setting that the Parker family established their home, cherishing the quiet environment and the tight-knit bonds of their household. Sharon Parker, a 33-year-old billing coordinator at Charterglade Hospital, was a devoted mother whose primary passion in life was the care and happiness of her children. She had married Gary Parker, a hard-working carpenter and supervisor for a local home building company, in the year 1983. Together, they raised a blended family that included Sharon S.'s teenage daughter, Heather, who was born in the year 1976 from a brief previous marriage, and young twin sons, Joshua and Jacob, born a year after Sharon and Gary wed. By the spring of the year 1990, the family was filled with hot anticipation as they welcomed a new addition, a baby girl named Julie, who was born on March 19th of that year. The innocence and tranquility of the Parker household came to a sudden and tragic end on March 29, 1990, only 10 days after the birth of baby Julie. On that warm spring afternoon, 6-year-old twins, Jacob and Joshua, returned home from school on their regular bus, excited to tell their mother about the events of their school day. Upon opening the front door, they called out to their mother, expecting her usual warm welcome. Instead, they discovered her slumped over the side of a reclining chair in the living room. At first, the young boys believed she was merely asleep, but as they stepped closer, they noticed a pool of blood on the floor and a severe wound to her head. Terrified and confused, the young twins began to search the house for their 10-day-old baby sister, Julie. But the infant was nowhere to be found, and the home was completely silent. Unable to comprehend the gravity of the situation, the frightened boys went back outside to wait for their 14-year-old sister, Heather, to arrive on her school bus. When Heather stepped off her bus shortly afterward, she was surprised to find her younger brothers waiting for her outside. After they frantically explained that something was wrong with their mother, Heather entered the home and encountered the devastating scene. Despite her youth and the immense shock of the moment, Heather displayed remarkable maturity. She immediately realized that her mother was deceased and that her baby sister was missing. After checking every room in the house in a desperate search for the infant, Heather called emergency services, gathered her younger brothers, and walked them to a neighboring babysitter's house. The babysitter immediately attempted to contact Gary Parker at his construction job to inform him of the emergency. First responders and law enforcement officers arrived at the Parker residence shortly after receiving the emergency call. Detectives, including investigator Les Partington, were dispatched to the scene to initiate a homicide investigation. The primary challenge facing the investigative team was the dual nature of the crisis. They were confronted with a tragic homicide and an urgent, time-sensitive kidnapping. A 10-day-old infant was missing, and without immediate parental care and nourishment, her survival was in grave jeopardy. Law enforcement mobilized immediately, launching a massive search effort that utilized helicopters, tracking dogs, and dozens of officers who canvassed the surrounding neighborhoods, checked local fields, and searched nearby structures. An all-points bulletin was issued to law enforcement agencies across the state, and investigators began interviewing family members and neighbors to piece together the events of the day. During the initial processing of the crime scene, forensic technicians noted that there were no signs of forced entry at the Parker residence. Sharon Parker was found resting with one leg tucked comfortably under her, suggesting that she had been at ease in her environment and had likely known or willingly admitted the person who entered her home. The medical examiner later confirmed that she had succumbed to a single close-range gunshot wound to the back of the head, and the projectile recovered from the scene was determined to be a .25 caliber bullet. As investigators searched for leads, they interviewed Heather Parker, who provided a critical piece of information. She revealed that a few days prior to the tragedy, her stepfather, Gary, had brought his workplace supervisor, a woman named Stephanie, to the home to meet the newborn baby. Sharon had been visibly upset by this unannounced visit, and the incident had caused tension between Sharon and Gary. This revelation led detectives to focus their initial inquiries on Gary Parker and Stephanie. During his initial interview, Gary appeared highly distressed, but was not entirely forthcoming about his professional relationship with Stephanie, later explaining that he feared the disclosure would make investigators suspicious of him. He also admitted to owning a small-caliber handgun, which he kept under the seat of his truck. Investigators recovered the firearm, but forensic analysis determined it was a .22 caliber weapon, which did not match the .25 caliber bullet used in the crime. Furthermore, thorough background checks and interviews verified that both Gary and Stephanie had solid alibis, as they were documented to be at work during the time the crime occurred. Consequently, both individuals were cleared of any involvement. With the family members eliminated as suspects, investigators turned their attention back to the neighborhood canvass. A neighbor reported seeing a faded red hatchback, specifically described as a red Subaru, pull into the Parker driveway at approximately 9:45 on the morning of March 29, 1990. The witness observed a dark-haired woman, approximately 5 feet 8 to 5 feet 9 inches tall, exit the vehicle and enter the home. Using this description, law enforcement created a composite sketch of the mysterious visitor and distributed it to local news media, hoping that a member of the public would recognize the individual. The breakthrough in the case occurred within 24 hours of the crime, thanks to a vital tip from Peggy Mason, an employee at a local Perkins restaurant. Peggy contacted the sheriff's department after hearing news reports about the homicide and the missing infant. She reported that her coworker, a cook named Kirk, had announced the birth of his daughter, whom his wife, Betty Ann Kirk, had allegedly delivered on the very day of the murder, March 29, 1990. Peggy explained that Betty Ann's pregnancy had been the subject of suspicion among the restaurant staff for several months. Craig had announced the pregnancy in the summer of the year 1989, but as the months progressed, Betty Ann did not appear to gain weight or show the physical signs of an expectant mother. When questioned, Craig explained that his wife was suffering from a kidney condition that affected her appearance. By March of 1990, the supposed pregnancy had reached 43 weeks, an unusually long duration that heightened the suspicions of coworkers. Peggy Mason further reported that on the day after the murder, Betty Ann Kirk had visited the restaurant with a newborn baby girl. Peggy observed several highly unusual behaviors during the visit. Betty Ann cradled the infant extremely tightly and seemed defensive, preventing anyone from getting too close to the child. When Peggy managed to get a closer look, she noticed that the baby's head had been shaved. However, a small patch of long dark hair had been missed near the back of the head, revealing that the infant naturally possessed a full head of dark hair. Peggy also noted that Betty Ann drove a faded red Subaru hatchback, which perfectly matched the description of the vehicle seen at the Parker home. Upon receiving this tip, investigators immediately recognized the name of Betty Ann Kirk. One of the detectives was already conducting an active investigation involving Betty Ann for writing fraudulent checks at a local grocery store. A review of her background revealed a history of instability, financial distress, and domestic conflict. Betty Ann, who was 31 years old, had 2 children from a previous marriage who had been placed in foster care by the State Social Services Department due to domestic instability and neglect. She had married Kirk in the year 1983, but the marriage was characterized by financial hardship, and Craig had recently threatened to end the relationship. Psychological analysis of the case suggests that Betty Ann Kirk was highly motivated by a desperate desire to prevent her husband from leaving her. She had announced her pregnancy in the summer of the year 1989 in an attempt to stabilize her marriage. However, she suffered a miscarriage in December of that year. Fearing that the disclosure of the miscarriage would lead Craig to leave, Betty Ann decided to maintain the deception. She continued to pretend she was pregnant, wearing loose clothing, purchasing baby supplies, and preparing a nursery in their trailer. As the months passed, she realized that she would eventually need to produce a baby to sustain the lie, leading her to formulate a desperate and diabolical plan to obtain an infant. Armed with this information, detectives proceeded to the Kirk residence, a poorly maintained trailer in Fort Myers. Upon their arrival, they found Kirk heavily intoxicated and unable to provide coherent answers. Betty Ann Kirk emerged from a back room and was questioned about the newborn baby. She claimed that she had given birth to her daughter, whom she named Laura Velta Kirk, on March 29th at a public health department clinic on Michigan Avenue. She further claimed that the clinic had discharged her immediately after the birth, and she was unable to produce a birth certificate or medical records to support her claim. Investigators, familiar with local medical facilities, knew that the health clinic on Michigan Avenue did not possess delivery facilities or provide maternity ward services. During the visit, investigators requested to see the baby. When Betty Ann presented the infant, a detective, ve kepte hot young children, noted that the baby appeared to be significantly older and more alert than a newborn who had been born only a day prior. The infant's eyes were open, and her physical development was consistent with a child who was approximately 10 to 12 days old. Recognizing the potential danger to the child, but needing to verify the mother's medical claims before making an arrest, the investigators stepped away from the residence and began verifying information. They contacted every hospital and clinic in the region, confirming that there was no record of Betty Ann Kirk giving birth. Meanwhile, an officer was stationed near the Kirk residence to conduct surveillance. Late that evening, the officer observed Betty Ann repeatedly carrying baskets and bags of clothing from her home to her red Subaru. Recognizing that she was attempting to flee, law enforcement initiated a traffic stop a short distance from the residence. Although the baby was not in the vehicle with her, Betty Ann was detained and agreed to accompany detectives to headquarters for questioning. Concerned for the safety of the infant left behind with an intoxicated father, investigators returned to the trailer, secured the child, and contacted the State Child Welfare Agency. The baby was transported to Lee Memorial Hospital for examination, where she was positively identified as the missing Julie Parker. During her formal interrogation, Betty Ann Kirk initially maintained her innocence, but eventually offered a highly implausible explanation for the events. She admitted that she knew Sharon Parker, claiming they had met at a shopping mall where Betty Ann volunteered as a party clown and painted the faces of Sharon S.'s twin sons. She stated that after reading the birth announcement for Sharon S. baby in the newspaper, she decided to visit the Parker home to offer her congratulations. According to Betty Ann, she was invited inside, and the two women conversed amicably. She claimed that Sharon gave her $1 to purchase a snack at a nearby convenience store. Upon her return, Betty Ann claimed that, as she reached into her purse for change, her .25 caliber handgun accidentally slipped from her bag. She asserted that when she grabbed the firearm, it accidentally discharged, striking Sharon in the head. She claimed that she panicked and fled the residence, taking baby Julie with her.
Forensic check.
And ballistic evidence thoroughly disproved this claim of an accidental shooting. The medical examiner's findings indicated that the bullet had entered the back of Sharon's head at an angle that could not have resulted from a weapon accidentally falling from a purse. The trajectory demonstrated that the shooter had stood directly behind and slightly above the victim, executing a deliberate and close-range shot, while Sharon was seated comfortably in her chair. Furthermore, a search of Betty Ann's red Subaru yielded highly incriminating evidence, including the missing celebratory banner from the Parker home, various baby items stolen from the residence, and a collection of local newspapers containing birth announcements. Several of the birth announcements, including the notice for Sharon Parker S. baby, had been circled in pen. Subsequent investigations revealed that Betty Ann Kirk had visited at least one other mother, whose name was circled in the birth announcements, presenting herself as a visiting healthcare worker in an attempt to gain entry into the home. This evidence demonstrated a pattern of premeditated behavior, showing that Betty Ann had been systematically searching for a newborn baby to steal in order to complete her fraudulent pregnancy. Her plan was not a sudden act of panic, but a calculated effort to locate and abduct a child from an unsuspecting mother. In May of the year 1991, facing a potential death sentence if the case proceeded to trial, Betty Ann Kirk entered a plea of no contest to charges of first-degree murder and kidnapping. She was sentenced to life in prison, ensuring she would remain incarcerated for the remainder of her life, while sparing the Parker family the emotional trauma of a detailed trial. Baby Julie was returned to the custody of her father, Gary, and her siblings, who raised her with a deep appreciation for the memory of the mother she would never have the opportunity to know. An analysis of this case highlights the profound psychological motives that drive certain individuals to commit such extreme acts of deception and violence. Infant abduction by non-family members is an extremely rare but devastating crime, often driven by a psychological condition known as pseudopsychosis, or phantom pregnancy, or by a highly organized delusional system, where an individual fakes a pregnancy to maintain a relationship, gain attention, or secure a sense of identity. In the case of Betty Ann Kirk, her motive was rooted in a desperate desire to preserve her marriage and prevent her husband from leaving. Having suffered a miscarriage, she lacked the emotional coping mechanisms to accept the loss and communicate the truth to her husband. Instead, she chose to escalate her deception, constructing a complex web of lies that ultimately required a violent resolution to sustain. The frequency of such cases, though low, is often tied to societal pressures surrounding motherhood and the fear of relationship abandonment. When individuals tie their self-worth and the stability of their relationships entirely to their reproductive capabilities, the loss of a pregnancy can trigger severe psychological distress. In the absence of mental health support, unstable individuals may resort to extreme behaviors, projecting their internal crisis onto unsuspecting families. The vulnerability of newborn infants and the public availability of birth announcements in the late 20th century made it easier for motivated offenders to identify potential victims, as demonstrated by the circled newspaper clippings found in the perpetrator's vehicle. Despite the calculated nature of her plan, Betty Ann Kirk exhibited a profound lack of criminal sophistication. Her efforts to conceal the identity of the stolen baby were clumsy and easily detected. Shaving the head of a 10-day-old infant to disguise her dark hair was an unusual and highly suspicious action that immediately drew the attention of an observant coworker. Furthermore, Betty Ann used her own registered vehicle, a highly recognizable faded red Subaru, to travel to the victim's home, leaving a distinct physical clue that was quickly reported by neighbors. Her choice of an alibi, claiming to have given birth at a clinic that did not possess delivery facilities, demonstrated a lack of basic research and logical planning, allowing investigators to quickly dismantle her story. The resolution of this case underscores the critical importance of community vigilance and intuitive observation. The astute observations of Peggy Mason at the Perkins restaurant were the single most important detail that allowed law enforcement to locate baby Julie and identify the perpetrator. Peggy's willingness to report her suspicions, despite the close professional relationship she shared with the perpetrator's husband, represents a courageous act of civic responsibility that saved a child's life. The case demonstrates that effective crime prevention and resolution rely heavily on the partnership between an alert public and dedicated law enforcement agencies. Several profound life lessons can be drawn from this tragedy to prevent similar occurrences. First, there is a critical need for enhanced security and privacy surrounding personal information, particularly regarding the birth of children. While celebrating the arrival of a newborn is a joyous occasion, publishing detailed personal information, such as home addresses or specific family details in public forums, can expose families to potential risks. In the modern era, this lesson extends to social media platforms, where parents should exercise caution when sharing photographs and location details of their children. Second, the case highlights the necessity of accessible mental health resources and support systems for individuals experiencing reproductive trauma, miscarriage, or severe relationship distress. Early psychological intervention can help individuals cope with grief and loss, preventing the escalation of delusions and the development of dangerous behaviors. If family members, friends, or medical professionals observe signs of extreme denial or unusual behavior during or after a pregnancy, they should encourage the individual to seek professional support. For law enforcement agencies, this case offers valuable strategies for expediting the resolution of child abduction investigations. The rapid success of the Lee County Sheriff's Department was achieved through immediate multi-agency cooperation, swift neighborhood canvassing, and the effective use of media to distribute composite sketches and information. When dealing with the disappearance of an infant, time is of the essence. Establishing immediate communication channels with local hospitals, pediatric clinics, and child welfare agencies can help investigators quickly verify birth records and identify suspicious claims of newborn arrivals. Furthermore, prioritizing and systematically tracking every public tip, no matter how unusual, is essential, as the key to solving a complex case often rests in a single, seemingly minor detail reported by an observant citizen. Ultimately, the resolution of the Sharon Parker case is a testament to the dedication of the investigating officers, the vigilance of a community member, and the resilience of a family that suffered an unimaginable loss. While the tragedy forever altered the lives of the Parker children, the swift capture of the perpetrator and the safe return of baby Julie ensured that justice was served. The memory of Sharon Parker remains honored through the lives of her children, who grew up supporting one another and demonstrating the enduring power of family love over senseless acts of desperation. To understand the tragic mechanisms of certain rare and deeply distressing offenses, one must look closely at the intersection of desperate psychological denial and the social constructs of personal identity. Cases involving infant abduction, particularly those preceded by fabricated pregnancies, represent a profound anomaly in criminal behavior. These events do not typically originate from a desire for material gain or conventional malice. Instead, they are born from an intense, distorted longing for maternal status or a desperate bid to preserve a dissolving interpersonal relationship. In many such instances, a perpetrator constructs an elaborate web of falsehoods, announcing a pregnancy to family, friends, and partners to secure affection, validation, or to prevent a partner from departing. As the fictional gestational period nears its inevitable conclusion, the perpetrator faces an unbearable psychological crisis. The choice becomes stark: either confess to the long-running deception and face social ruin, or somehow acquire a child to present as their own. In their distorted reasoning, the latter option appears as the only viable exit, leading them to view other families not as fellow human beings, but as resources to be exploited. This psychological desperation explains why such cases, though fortunately rare, follow a remarkably consistent and disturbing pattern across different communities and eras. The tragic events that unfolded in Lehigh Acres, Florida, in the spring of the year 1990, offer a stark and sober look into this specific criminal psychology. Lehigh Acres, situated just outside of Fort Myers, was known in the late 1980s and early 1990s as a peaceful, well-kept haven with a small-town vibe. It was a place where families felt secure, children spent their afternoons playing outdoors, and the secluded nature of the properties offered a quiet, idyllic childhood. In this close-knit environment lived the Parker family, led by Sharon Parker, a 33-year-old mother of 4, whose life was deeply rooted in her family. Sharon was a vibrant, fashion-conscious woman who loved music and spent her Saturday mornings singing with her children. She worked as a billing coordinator at a local hospital, but her true passion was being a dedicated mother. Her eldest daughter, Heather, born in the year 1976, was a responsible teenager who acted as a second mother to her younger siblings. In the year 1983, Sharon met and married Gary Parker, a hardworking carpenter and house-building supervisor. Together, their family grew with the birth of twin sons, Jacob and Joshua. By the beginning of the year 1990, the family was filled ve kep ite, hot anticipation for the arrival of a new baby girl, Julie, who was born on March 19th of that year, weighing 7 pounds with a full head of dark hair. The childhood innocence of the Parker family was shattered on the afternoon of March 29th, 1990. 6-year-old twins, Jacob and Joshua, returned home from school on the bus, eager to tell their mother about their day. When they opened the front door and called out, they received no response. Instead, they found their mother slumped over in her reclining chair, appearing to be asleep. It was only when they approached that they noticed a pool of blood on the floor and a severe injury to her head. Confused and deeply frightened, the young boys began a desperate search for their 10-day-old sister, Julie, expecting to hear her crying. When they found the house empty of the newborn, they went back outside to wait for their 14-year-old sister, Heather, to arrive on her school bus. Upon hearing her brother's terrifying account, Heather entered the home, witnessed the devastating scene, and immediately took action. She called the emergency operator on 911 and safely escorted her young brothers to a nearby babysitter's house. When first responders and detectives, including investigator Les Partington, arrived at the residence, they immediately recognized the gravity of the situation. They were facing both a homicide and an urgent kidnapping case. Sharon Parker had been fatally shot at Mulfif close range in the back of the head. Crucially, the crime scene technicians observed that there were no signs of forced entry, and Sharon was found with one leg comfortably tucked under the other, suggesting she was relaxed and likely knew the person she had let into her home. The immediate priority for the entire sheriff's department was to locate the missing 10-day-old baby. Helicopters were deployed, and an all-points bulletin was issued as officers searched neighboring streets, vehicles, and wooded areas. Knowing that a newborn baby could not survive long without proper parental care. During the initial phase of the investigation, detectives interviewed everyone associated with the family, keeping all possibilities open. Heather provided a compelling detail, noting that a few days prior, Gary had brought his coworker and supervisor, Stephanie, to the house to meet the baby, which had caused some tension between her parents. When Gary was interviewed, he initially withheld information about his working relationship with his boss, fearing it would make him a suspect. He also informed detectives that he kept a small caliber firearm under the seat of his truck and voluntarily turned it over. However, Within 24 hours, the medical examiner confirmed that Sharon had been killed with a .25 caliber projectile, whereas the firearm Gary surrendered was a .22 caliber. Furthermore, Gary's alibi of being at work and then at a local establishment was thoroughly verified, and Stephania's alibi was also confirmed, eliminating them both as suspects. The breakthrough in the case came from a vital community tip. Peggy Mason, an employee at a local Perkins restaurant, contacted the Sheriff's Department with highly suspicious observations regarding a coworker's wife, Betty Ann Kirk. Peggy explained that the community was highly alert due to the news of the kidnapping, and her suspicions were raised when Betty Ann came into the restaurant carrying a newborn baby. Betty Ann, who was 31 years old, claimed to have given birth on March 29, 1990, the very day of the murder. However, Peggy and other co-workers had long been skeptical of Betty Ann's pregnancy. She had not appeared to gain weight normally, and when questioned about her lack of physical changes, her husband, Craig Kirk, had claimed she was experiencing kidney issues. Most strikingly, when Peggy pressed to see the newborn, she noticed that the baby's head had been hastily shaved, with a single long dark tuft of hair remaining that had been missed. This raised immediate alarms, as the missing baby Julie was known to have a full head of dark hair. Peggy also noted that Betty Ann drove a faded red hatchback, which perfectly matched the description of a suspicious vehicle spotted in the Parker driveway by a neighbor on the morning of the crime. As detectives dug into the background of Betty Ann Kirk, they uncovered a history of emotional instability and desperate deception.